For 20 long years, they walked right past him in the hallway, cracked jokes behind his back, and never once bothered to say his name, until the day he stepped into the boardroom as the new owner of the company and fired every single one of them. No one ever paid much attention to Harold Benson. He was just the janitor, there to mop floors near the vending machines, to wipe down the glass doors before the sun came up, pushing his yellow cart past rows of cubicles, humming to himself while everyone else pounded away at emails or left without saying a word. At Sycamore Dynamics in Glendale, Nevada, Harold was invisible. No title, no respect, not even a simple, "Good morning, Mr. Benson." Most folks didn't even know his last name. Some called him Hal. Others just ignored him completely. "Hey, missed a spot." One manager smirked once, spilling his coffee on purpose before walking away, laughing with a couple of interns. Harold looked down at the mess, knelt, and cleaned it without saying a word. But yeah, it stung. Every night for 20 years, Harold clocked in at 9 p.m. and left at 6 in the morning. 6 nights a week. Same uniform, same quiet rhythm. He didn't hang out in the break room, didn't make small talk, didn't take sick days. Even the badge scanner at the front door seemed tired of seeing him. What they never noticed, what they never even thought to ask, was who he really was underneath that mop. Because once upon a time he'd been something else. Not a CEO, not Ivy League, but sharp, really sharp. He used to build things with his hands. Took apart radios as a kid, just to figure out how they worked. Life had knocked him around a bit, bad investments, a cousin who ran off with his savings, a son he hadn't spoken to in over a decade. But Harold never talked about that. He just worked, and he listened. He heard the clinking glasses in the executive lounge, the whispers through the walls, the careless gossip from employees who forgot someone was standing right there, someone who never stopped paying attention. Opening scene, dark warehouse, present day. VO, narrator. They never saw him, not really, just the quiet old janitor, 57 years old, shoulders low, eyes always watching, and a mop that moved like clockwork. Left, right, repeat. They called him Howie. No one knew his full name, no one ever asked. Flashback, office building, 20 years ago. When Howard Ellison first walked through the doors of Primridge and Chase, he wasn't looking for a paycheck. He was looking for answers. Behind every boardroom smile, beneath every polished shoe, he saw the lies. He saw the man who stole his father's ideas. He saw the man who destroyed his mother's dignity in a closed-door meeting. He saw the firm that swallowed his family whole. So he swept floors and listened. Montage. 2 decades of janitorial work. For 20 years, he was the shadow in the hall, invisible, patient. He watched mergers crumble. He heard secrets in bathroom stalls. He memorized passwords and mapped out every name that mattered. He never said a word, not even when they laughed as he passed, not even when they signed billion-dollar deals on desks he cleaned at midnight. Cut to present day, conference room. Today, he walked into that same building, not in a janitor's jumpsuit, but in a tailored charcoal suit. He didn't ask to speak to the board. He summoned them. Boardroom reaction shots. Confusion, shock. He slid a folder across the glass table. Inside, deeds, shares, buyout papers. He didn't raise his voice, didn't smile. He just looked them in the eyes and said, "You don't know me, but I know all of you. And this has been 20 years in the making." VO, final montage. They thought power was noise, but he knew better. Real power is quiet. It waits, it watches, and when the time comes, it doesn't knock. It walks in, owns the building, and sweeps the past clean. But you never cared if it felt good. You valued polish over people, appearances over actions. Culture was a slide deck to you, not a promise. I've cleaned your offices, picked up the wrappers from your catered lunches, wiped down the glass where you left your fingerprints, thinking no one would notice the smudges, but I did. I noticed everything. Every nod you saved for each other but never gave to me. Every memo about inclusion that never included us. Every policy that kept us invisible. Today, that ends. This company isn't yours anymore. It's ours. The quiet, the overlooked, the ones who were always here. You just never looked down long enough to see us. Howard Ellison closed the folder, tucked it under his arm, and stepped away from the table. No mic drop. No drama. Just truth. Delivered plainly. And when he walked out, no one followed. Not at first. They just sat there, still trying to process how the janitor they never knew had just become the architect of their reckoning. Once, he overheard someone say, "If I owned this place, I'd fire the whole ops team." That line stuck with him. Because the irony? He was already thinking the same thing. Sycamore wasn't cold in temperature. It was always a pleasant 72, but it was cold in that other way. The kind of cold that makes you feel like you're part of the wallpaper. People passed him like he didn't exist. Still, he kept showing up. One night, he found a pair of gold cufflinks in the bathroom, engraved with the initials JB. He dropped them off at reception in a small plastic bag, no note. A few hours later, a VP walked by and said, "You people really never quit, huh?" Harold didn't flinch, didn't say a word, didn't report it. He just kept moving, because while everyone else saw a man with a mop, Harold saw numbers, patterns, opportunity, and time. Time was working for him, not against him. The truth is, Harold had learned long ago not to rush. Back in his 30s, he lost everything when his trucking company collapsed, left him with nothing but debt and a rusty old Ford. Since then, patience became his investment. So, while he scrubbed spilled coffee from conference tables, he studied. He watched how people treated each other. Who kissed up, who got sloppy, who always left early, who shared passwords out loud. He wasn't snooping, he was learning. There was a time, years ago, when Harold used to talk more. Back when his wife was still alive. Back when his teenage son still looked up to him. But after losing them both, Harold stopped speaking and started listening. And in that silence, he began to notice everything. The company was profitable, sure, but it was leaking from the inside. Too many middle managers. Too much spending on things no one tracked. No one else seemed to notice, but Harold did. He passed by whiteboards scribbled with half-finished strategies. He picked up printouts tossed in the trash, budgets, memos, numbers, every document, every offhand comment. It all painted a picture, and Harold remembered all of it. During breaks, he'd sit in the supply closet, jotting notes in a worn leather notebook. Not full sentences, just dates, figures, names, quiet calculations. And around that time, the idea started to take shape. He didn't have a name for it yet. Didn't know exactly how he'd pull it off. But he knew one thing. If he kept quiet, stayed patient, and moved with purpose, he could flip the entire story. One night, while cleaning the executive wing, he overheard two board members chatting. They were in town for a quarterly review, talking mergers, shares, and buyouts in low voices, but not low enough. They figured the janitor wouldn't understand a word. But Marcus knew exactly what they meant. That morning, he sat alone in his tiny kitchen, staring at the old metal newspaper rack by the fridge. It was empty now. Nobody really read newspapers anymore, but he remembered the feeling, flipping through the financial section as a younger man, always feeling like he didn't belong. Not anymore. The following week, he picked up the phone and called someone he hadn't spoken to in over 25 years. Lionel Boone, an old friend from his hometown in Georgia, now working as a private financial consultant out in Arizona. Lionel owed him a favor. A big one. They met at a quiet roadside diner just off the freeway outside Flagstaff. Marcus showed up in his janitor uniform. Lionel, relaxed in a linen shirt and loafers, looked up and laughed. "Man, what are you doing in that getup?" Marcus smiled and said, keeping my head down. But I think it's time I start making some moves. He laid out the idea, bit by bit. At first, Lionel wasn't sold, but as the coffee cooled and Marcus kept talking, something shifted. "You want to buy into the company you clean?" Lionel asked, raising an eyebrow. Marcus shook his head. "Not me. A name you'll help me create." They set up a small LLC with Lionel as the public face. Marcus funneled in every dollar he had, savings, a modest inheritance, even sold his old pickup and a patch of land he'd held onto for years. Nothing flashy, just enough to pick up a small batch of shares, quietly, anonymously. Nobody at Silveridge noticed. Why would they? It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't loud, and quiet things tend to grow without warning. But that first move wasn't going to be the last. One spilled bucket would push everything faster than he planned. It happened on a hot Tuesday night in June. One of those evenings where the Arizona desert air doesn't cool, even after sundown. Marcus had just finished cleaning the third-floor restrooms and headed toward the executive boardroom to take out the trash. As always, he was careful. Never left the tiles wet, never made a sound. But that night, something slipped. His bucket clipped the edge of a door frame. Soapy water surged forward, splashing across the glossy conference room floor, right in front of a group of mid-level managers prepping slides for an upcoming investor pitch. There was a beat of silence, then laughter. "Jesus, Marcus," barked Gil Bradford, one of the louder VPs. "Can you not screw up the floors for once? This is why you people stay in your lane." Marcus didn't say a word, just reached into his cart for some paper towels. But Gil kept going. "Get someone who knows what they're doing," he muttered, waving off to a nearby intern like Marcus wasn't even there. "This is why we outsource this crap." Still, Marcus said nothing, just wiped the floor slowly, feeling the heat of the stairs. No one helped. No one asked if he was all right. He left the room quietly, but that moment carved itself deep into his chest. Not because it was new, but because Gil had laughed like it was something to be proud of. Later that night, alone in the janitor's closet, Marcus pulled out his notebook and wrote down one word: Bradford. Then he flipped the page and started crunching numbers. That was the real turning point. The first shares had already been bought under the LLC Lionel helped set up, called Granite Creek Holdings. It sounded clean, legit, like a real firm. At the time, they held just under 1% of Silveridge's private equity. Nothing big, nothing noticeable. But now, it wasn't just a quiet experiment. Gil had lit a fire in him. From that moment on, every paycheck Marcus earned went straight into the plan. He moved into a smaller apartment, sold his late wife's wedding ring, something he'd kept tucked away for years. He told himself she'd understand. This wasn't about revenge. This was about building something bigger than bitterness. By the end of the year, Granite Creek Holdings had quietly accumulated nearly 3% of the company, and not a single soul at Silveridge had a clue. The company was growing fast, so fast, in fact, that they'd just opened a second office out in Tempe. Leadership was stretched thin, juggling investor calls, quarterly earnings reports, and public image. No one bothered asking about minor equity transfers, especially not from a quiet little firm that never showed up to board meetings or made a fuss. But Howard saw everything. Every night, he heard the same voices laughing in the break room, whispering behind glass office doors. And while they slept, he studied. Every December, the company allowed its less active shareholders the option to sell their shares, either back to the company or to private third parties. So, through a shell company called Granite Rise, Howard started acquiring those shares in tiny, nearly invisible amounts. One here, one there. It was slow work, tedious. Some nights he came home wondering if it was all just a fantasy, a dream built on pride. But then he'd remember Gil's smirk. He'd remember how people weaved around his cart like he was some walking inconvenience. He'd remember how invisible he had become, and how powerful that invisibility really was. Clarence checked in once a month to make sure Howard still wanted to keep going. Howard always gave the same answer. Not until I can sit at the front of that building without a mop in my hand. What Howard didn't know yet was that the final push would come from a moment more insulting than any that came before. It was a Friday night in early February. The office was nearly empty. Most of the staff had left for a corporate retreat in Sedona. A couple of junior marketing associates wandered into the break room mid-conversation, laughing too loud. "Have you seen the janitor's shoes? Dude probably pulled them out of a dumpster," one said. The other took a sip of sparkling water and added, "Bet he doesn't even have a bank account. Probably gets paid in quarters." They didn't see Howard behind the vending machine. They didn't care. He didn't freeze because the words hurt in a new way. They didn't. He froze because something clicked. This wasn't just about building wealth anymore. It was about respect, about how easily people forgot that the ones they step over might one day stand taller than them. That night, when the building emptied, Howard didn't clean. He sat on a crate in the supply, staring at the wall. Then he picked up his phone and called Clarence. "We're speeding things up," he said. "I want to be in that boardroom by end of next year." Clarence exhaled on the other end. "You sure? I'm done waiting for people to change," Howard said. "I'm changing the room." The next 6 months were a blur. Howard worked with Clarence to open 3 more shell companies, each one legally distinct, each acquiring more and more of Morningside's private shares, always staying anonymous. One of the firms, Tideswell Holdings, even got a small mention in the company's investor newsletter. No one looked deeper. By August, the combined holdings of Howard's LLCs made up 14% of the company's private equity, just under the threshold for mandatory board disclosure. But he was ready for that too. With Clarence's help, he brought in 2 retired teachers from Scottsdale to serve as silent figureheads. He wrote Gil's name again in his notebook, circled it, and underlined it twice, right beneath the word December. By then, Howard's combined holdings had quietly climbed to 49%, just 1% shy of majority control. The next round of shares wouldn't be available until March, and he already had all the paperwork prepped and signed. All he needed was a little more time, but just when everything seemed to fall into place, someone inside the company finally noticed. And what they did nearly blew the whole plan apart. The email came unexpectedly. Howard had just clocked out, heading to his car before sunrise, when his phone rang. Clarence's voice was low and tense. "Somebody's digging," he said. A junior compliance analyst had flagged a suspicious pattern. 3 separate LLCs had purchased shares at the same time, all with oddly similar structures. Howard stayed quiet. "They haven't traced it to you yet," Clarence added, "but they're asking questions. You've got 2 choices. Disappear now, or step out of the shadows." Sitting in the front seat of his beat-up 2002 Corolla, hands resting still on the wheel, Howard didn't hesitate. "I'll handle it," he said calmly, then hung up. That weekend, he barely slept, reworking the final ownership filings into one clean, full disclosure statement that laid out everything. Every shell company, every signature, notarized and dated. On Monday morning, he showed up at Morningside Tech in a navy blue suit. It was the first time anyone had seen him in anything other than a janitor's uniform. Security didn't recognize him. One even tried to stop him at the front desk. But Howard didn't argue. He simply handed over a sealed envelope and asked it be delivered to the board before their 10 a.m. meeting. Then he walked away. By noon, the CEO, Olivia Perrin, was on the phone trying to make sense of it. Who was Howard Ellison? And how did a former janitor end up owning 51% of the company? Legal ran every check they could. The LLCs were legit, the filings flawless, the signatures airtight. At 1:15 p.m. sharp, Howard returned. But this time he took the main elevator to the top floor. No badge, no escort. They were expecting him now. He entered the boardroom where the same executives who never once looked him in the eye now sat in stunned silence. Olivia stood to greet him. "Mr. Ellison, we didn't realize." Howard raised his hand gently. "I'm not here for applause." He set a manila folder on the table and opened it. Inside were 4 termination letters, signed and effective immediately. The room froze. Then he turned to Gil Brandon, the VP who used to mock him for sport. "You forgot my name for 20 years, Howard said, eyes locked, "but I never forgot yours." Gil opened his mouth, but nothing came out, his face pale. Howard faced the board. These 4 no longer represent the values this company needs. Their behavior, unwritten but deeply felt, has bred a culture of disrespect and silence. That ends today. Someone tried to interrupt, but Howard's quiet presence had grown so large no one dared speak over him. Olivia tried to regain control. "Mr. Ellison, this is highly irregular." Howard looked at her evenly. "What's irregular is allowing disrespect to fester while holding diversity luncheons and PR events. I'm not here to play along. I'm here to fix what should have been fixed long ago." The room had no answer, just silence. Finally, Olivia asked, "And what happens now?" Howard collected his papers. "Now I begin the work that matters." But he had one last thing to say before leaving, something that would echo long after he walked out. He leaned in slightly, resting both hands on the polished table. "You built this place to look good from the outside. Glossy branding, charity drives, photo ops. But inside it's rot. Not because of the product, because of the people in charge." Then he turned to Jill once more. "I remember every laugh at my expense, every insult, every time I was invisible. Until now." 8:05 p.m. That was the time Howard opened the door for Jordan's mother, and Jordan, without a second thought, brushed him off with a chuckle. "Oh, he's just one of the night guys. Don't worry about him." Howard remembered hearing the laughter even though they thought he couldn't. Across the room, Jordan sat stiff at the table, jaw tight, but he didn't fight back. "You're fired," Howard said in a low, even tone. "Effective immediately. Your badge won't work after today. Security will walk you out." Then he turned to Melissa Morgan, the compliance director who once cracked a joke at a holiday party about janitors being folks who didn't try hard enough in school. Howard hadn't been invited to that party, but the night receptionist had told him all about it. "You fired 2 part-time janitors last year for clocking in late once," he said, "but you let your own department miss deadlines for 6 months straight. You smiled in HR meetings and lied without blinking." Her mouth fell open. "I gave you 10 years, she began. "And you took more than you gave," he replied. "You're done." 2 more followed. Derek Kendall, head of strategy, and Dana Briggs, head of communications. They had smiled at him to his face, only to mock him behind his back. They helped build the smug culture that seeped through the building like mold behind the walls. Each fire-in was met with stunned silence. No arguments, just flushed faces and clenched jaws. Finally, a board member named Richard Navarro, a quiet man, spoke up. "Mr. Ellison, why didn't you bring this to us sooner? We could have handled it quietly." Howard looked at him, voice calm as ever. "I spent 20 years being quiet, watching you all pretend to care while ignoring the people who actually kept the place running. I didn't need you to handle it. I needed you to see it." The meeting ended in silence. Jordan and the rest left, security at their sides. No farewell emails, no handshakes. Howard stood in the hallway afterward, looking out over the open floor where employees typed away at their desks. Some glanced up. Most didn't recognize him, but a few did. One woman stepped forward. Her name was Leah Armstrong from accounting. She used to greet him when she worked late, always thanked him when he emptied her trash. "I heard what happened," she said gently. "Is it true?" He gave a quiet nod. She smiled. About time. That same afternoon, Howard met with HR. He ordered a full review of contractor policies, promotion records, and internal complaints. He promoted 2 longtime staffers who'd been ignored for years, including Roy Chen, a maintenance supervisor who'd been quietly holding the janitorial department together long before Howard ever came along. "Roy deserves a real title," Howard said, "and an office that doesn't have a mop sink." The following week, every department got fresh training on ethics, leadership, and equity, led not by consultants but by folks within the company who had stuck around, despite the toxic culture. Howard didn't make speeches. He didn't throw a party. He just kept showing up, walking the halls, asking questions, and actually listening. But as the company began to breathe again, Howard started to wonder, what comes after the mission is complete? He never wanted attention. That's not why he did it. His quiet rise wasn't about power or forcing people to call him sir. He didn't need applause. He needed real, lasting change. And now that it had begun, he just felt tired. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix, the kind that sits deep in your bones after you've carried something heavy for too long. A few months after the firings, something shifted. You could feel it in the little things. People holding the elevator, interns introducing themselves to the cleaning staff, managers eating lunch out in the open instead of behind glass doors. Howard spent the next year overseeing things, not from a corner office, but from a modest desk with a wobbly chair and a coffee pot that sputtered more than it brewed. He made sure frontline workers got to meet with leadership every quarter. He raised janitorial wages by 20%. He ensured contractors had a say in decisions that affected them. And through all of it, he stayed quiet about his own story. No newsletter blurbs, no press mentions, just silent corrections made in the places that mattered. By the time year 2 rolled around, Howard had already started planning his quiet exit. The only board member who'd ever answered him honestly was Rick Navarro, and that's who he went to. When Howard asked why no one had ever noticed what was really happening, Rick didn't dodge the question. "I want to pass this on," Howard told him, "not to another polished executive, to someone who actually listens." Rick nodded. "You already have someone in mind, don't you?" Howard smiled. "Yeah, Leah Armstrong. She sees people. Always has." Leah had started out as a junior accountant, worked her way up slowly. She was never loud, never showy, just like Howard. She knew the name of every janitor, asked real questions, paid attention to things no one else did. With the board's full support, Howard quietly transferred his voting power and stepped away from the company. No farewell speech, no send-off party. He simply walked out of that office building for the last time, got into the same old car he'd parked in that lot for 18 straight years. That night, he drove beyond the edge of town, off Route 60, pulled over, rolled down the window, and let the desert wind hit his face. He thought about his wife, his son, all those late nights pushing that cart through silent hallways, hoping life had something more in store. But in that moment, he didn't feel anger anymore, not pride either, just a deep, still peace. In his back pocket, he carried a folded note, the one he'd tucked into Leah's new desk drawer. It read, Power isn't about being noticed. It's about noticing what others miss and doing something about it. Back at the office, they kept one photo of him in the break room, not a professional headshot, just a quiet snapshot of him mopping the front lobby, headphones on, softly humming an old Motown song. Next to it was a simple plaque. No shiny frame, no bold letters, just 5 humble words. The man who paid attention. Howard never stepped foot in that building again. He spent his days volunteering at a local community garden and tutoring kids in basic math at a public library near Mesa. Nobody there had any idea who he used to be, and that's exactly how he wanted it. Because the legacy he left behind wasn't about wealth, revenge, or even justice. It was about humility, about what it means to really listen, to remember that the person sweeping your floors today might own the place tomorrow. So, before you speak, look. Before you judge, pause. And before you ignore someone, ask yourself, what if they've been watching you this whole time? If this story made you pause even for a second, share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you want more real stories that remind us who we're meant to be, subscribe, and let's keep each other accountable.